Ellie Miller, and you joined the due diligence training. Minnesota Housing's mission is to provide access to safe, decent, affordable housing and build stronger communities across the state by offering products and services to help Minnesotans buy and fix up their homes and stabilize neighborhoods, communities, and families. Minnesota Housing also supports the development and preservation of affordable rental housing through both the financing and long-term asset management of projects and developments. The agency has also pioneered a successful model for supportive housing that helps stabilize the lives of some of the state's most vulnerable citizens. As I said, you have joined the due diligence training for Bridges and Bridges RTC. Welcome. I first want to say congratulations on your award, and we're going to do some basic introductions of the people who will be presenting today. Again, my name is Ellie Miller. I'm the Bridges Program Manager, and I'm joined today by Meredith Mayran, the Homeless Grants and Administrative Support Coordinator. And Gary Travis is also on the line from the Department of Human Services, should we have any service-related questions. Today, we're going to review the general and program-specific due diligence and the submission and deadline requirements. This training should not take the entire time, although it may depend on the questions that you have. Also, a copy of this training, I've been asked if this will be recorded. It will be recorded, and the copy will be saved on our website. And the URL for the PowerPoint will be minnesotahousing.gov/sites, multifamily, and bridges. So we're going to go ahead and begin with a general due diligence, and I'm going to turn it over to Meredith.
Hello, everyone. As Ellie said, my name is Meredith Mayran, and I'm going to be going over just the general due diligence items that are required for the execution of your grant contract. We'll discuss the grant contract agreement, the signing of which will be initiated by us via DocuSign once all of your due diligence items have been submitted and approved, the certificate of good standing, board resolution, proof of insurance in the form of your certificate of liability, the SWIFT vendor number and W-9, and an electronic funds transfer authorization form only for new grantees or if your banking information has changed. So we'll start off with the grant contract agreement. We ask that you review the entire grant contract agreement and all exhibits to ensure accuracy and understand compliance. The electronic signing of the contracts via DocuSign will be initiated by Minnesota Housing once all of your due diligence items have been approved. So we ask that when you submit your due diligence items, you also send in the names, email addresses, and routing order, if applicable, for the authorized signers that are identified in your board resolution. We want to note a few important dates that are included in your grant contract agreement: the effective date, the grant period, and the expiration date. The effective date is either going to be July 1st, 2021, or when the contract is fully executed, whichever is later. It's the date when all parties have executed the document, which includes your signers and the signer for Minnesota Housing. The effective date is also the date when you can start incurring costs under the terms of the grant contract agreement. So any expenses incurred prior to the execution of the grant contract by both parties cannot be reimbursed. The grant period is the effective date of the contract through June 30th, 2023. It's the time period in which grant proceeds must be incurred and expended, and no funds can be used after this time. The grant period is a little different than the expiration date of the grant, which is September 30th, 2023. The additional 3 months will allow the submission of all final reports, documents, and other requirements by you to Minnesota Housing, as well as us to make all final payments. The certificate of good standing is only required for non-governmental organizations. You can either submit the current certificate of good standing, or you can send in a screenshot of current standing from the Minnesota Secretary of State website. If you choose to send in a screenshot, it needs to show the business record details and must include all information above the filing history. The renewal date must be after the start of the grant term. We also require a board resolution from your organization's board of directors. This must be a signed and dated original board resolution. It should be specific to this grant and include the total awarded amount, and it must include the names of the individuals who are authorized to sign the grant contract agreement. Proof of insurance is required. It must be employee dishonesty, crime coverage. We cannot accept employee theft coverage, so please note that. The amount must be at least 1/8 the amount of your total grant award. It can be submitted as a certificate of liability listing Minnesota Housing as a certificate holder, and the policy must be current with an expiration after the start of the grant term. We're asking that you send in your SWIFT vendor number. If you have not registered as a vendor with the state of Minnesota, you will need to do so prior to receiving payment. We will be posting this to our website, so this link will be available to you, or you can reach out and I can send it to you if you need to set up a vendor number. In addition to the SWIFT vendor number, please submit a completed and signed copy of your W-9. This information is needed for payment purposes. If you're a new grantee, or if you have a change to your banking information, you must submit an Eft Form allowing direct deposit of funds directly to your agency's financial institution. It's important to update this information immediately if your banking information changes. The forms can be accessed on the MMB website. You can either fill out the EFT authorization form if you're a new grantee, or the EFT bank change form if you've had a recent change. And now I'll go ahead and turn it back over to Ellie to discuss program-specific items.
Thank you. We're moving through this very quickly. I just want to say that if you're coming up with questions, you can type them in the questions box, and we can start to take a look at the questions you might have on the general due diligence. I believe our web organizer 2 can unmute lines, but I think if you're having them as we're reviewing this information, please feel free to jot your questions down. The program-specific due diligence we'll review next, and this is specific to Bridges and Bridges RTC where noted. Not all the program-specific information will pertain to both programs, so it's important that we pay attention to when RTC is called out. But the first thing I'm going to review is the Bridges waiting list selection plan, and that is only for Bridges grantees, the cooperative agreement, and then also the contact form. Next slide. So the waiting list selection plan, we are asking that this round you examine more closely your wait list practices. With the expansion of the definition of institution to include people on supervised release, we're posing the question as you're putting your waitlist practices together is how do you work with your waitlist practices to accommodate these new referrals? Along the same lines, how are your waiting list practices set up to be more responsive to people exiting institutions in general? Instead of having a long wait list, how can you have more real-time openings for people exiting institutions? If you have a long wait list, maybe similar to your housing choice voucher wait list or other wait lists, how can you work with your board and legal advisors to shift to a shorter, more responsive wait list format over time? These are the questions that we're starting to pose as providers are working toward really identifying that priority population and being able to be responsive. If you do currently have waitlist practices that aren't as responsive and are longer waitlist practices, and you need assistance from Minnesota Housing, please reach out to me to discuss how we can work on altering that waitlist practice going forward. And the earlier you reach out, the better. You know, before you submit a draft for approval, if you need assistance from Minnesota Housing to talk through these things, please reach out sooner than later. Next slide. So if changes to your waitlist selection plan are required, you'll be notified by me no later than June 15th of 2021. So you'll send in your draft, I'll have a chance to review it if I'm going to require any changes for this contract round. That's the date you'll be notified. The final version, after you've received that back, will be due to Minnesota Housing by Tuesday, June 22nd, 2021. Next slide. The second thing for this contract round that we highlighted in the application is the cooperative agreement. The cooperative agreement is meant to be a working document to reflect how Bridges operates in your service area. There's an example of a cooperative agreement that we post with the materials on our website. And this is really meant to be a template. It isn't necessarily the document that you submit for your area. It's meant to give you some highlighted points that we are encouraging as part of that cooperative agreement. So in the application, you noticed we had language asking you to identify the behavioral health providers and housing stability service providers in this agreement for this round, as well as identifying the resources that you have identified in this service area for this contract round. We're asking you to be a little bit more intentional and more specific about naming those entities so that we start to get a better feel for what services are available. The agreement does not require signatures from these additional entities, but if they have very specific roles in your agreement and you want to draft a section to outline those roles and have them sign to be held accountable under this agreement, we are not limiting your ability to do so. Also, as a reminder, if you're paying entities that are providing services or assistance, perhaps in a subcontract agreement to cover the region, a formal contract would be needed and not this cooperative agreement. Next slide. And again, as the definition of institution was expanded, in this agreement, you should be looking to identify a plan to reach out to the new entities to reach this population. So how are you going to receive referrals and what entities might assist with that process? The coordinated entry plan should also indicate the shift to a high priority homeless population and the plan to refer eligible households. Just as a reminder too, a final reminder that the signatures on these documents must be the executives of the organizations. So again, as you're looking to redraft this cooperative agreement, Minnesota Housing staff is available to assist. The earlier that you reach out and submit the draft and have conversations, if you are making changes or have questions, the better. Next slide. The cooperative agreement deadlines, again, submitting a draft that's going to be reviewed. The changes are required and you will be notified no later than Tuesday, June 15th, and then getting a fully executed cooperative agreement back to us by Tuesday, June 22nd. Next slide. Just wanted to highlight the contact form a bit. We want to make sure that we have at least 2 contacts that receive all of the grant-related communications from the primary agency receiving the contract. And then we also need contact information for your mental health initiative partner. And then the third bullet is for you to be really specific about what contact information you want to provide to the public, people that are seeking Bridges rental assistance. And this information is posted on our website, so it needs to be a contact that is responsive to the public for your agency. And then for RTC only, contact information for your partner mental health agency. Next slide. So submission and deadline, Meredith, am I going to pass it back to you to cover the last submission pieces?
Sure, I can go over that. So we're asking that you send all of the items to mhsa.grants@state.mn.us. Please include in the subject line the project name, so Bridges or Bridges RTC, and then the name of your agency. If you can name all documents by the grantee name and then the due diligence item name, that would help a lot with the submission. All of the general items can be submitted as a PDF, so your board resolution, your certificate of good standing, certificate of liability. However, the program-specific items must be submitted in their original format. Please submit those in the original format, waiting list selection plan, and cooperative agreement, as well as the contact form. All of the items must be received and approved before the grant contract agreement can be executed. So the sooner you're able to submit the items, especially those that may require additional review, the better. Reimbursement of expenses incurred prior to Minnesota Housing's execution of the grant contract cannot be allowed. So again, just want to allow enough time for review of all the items. We're asking for all items to be submitted by 4:30 p.m. on Monday, June 7th. And if you have any questions throughout the process, please feel free to reach out directly to the grants email, which is listed here, and was the email where you received the initial selection letter and all of the other exhibits. And now I think we can open it up to some questions. So feel free to put questions in the question box or raise your hand or indicate that you have a question and we can unmute your line. It looks like we might have one question from Corinne Stockwell. Corinne, if you want to unmute yourself, we've unmuted you and you can go ahead and raise your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, you can.
Okay. Just wondering if we are able to request forward funding. Do we do it during this process?
I can go ahead and take that one. The last contract round, we did receive a few requests for forward funding, and that would be the time to reach out to me to engage in that conversation. It's not a practice that Minnesota Housing would like to continue, so there are some parameters around being able to receive those funds. But if it's a situation that is important for your contract and for your organization, please reach out to me directly, and we can start that conversation now.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We had another question come through. Can receipt of Bridges and Bridges RTC be included in the same board resolution? And the answer would be yes. If you're able to still specify the total award amounts and call out the two programs, that would be fine. And you have your hand raised. I've unmuted your line, so you can unmute yourself and ask your question.
I just want to understand that the SWIFT vendor number is necessary for renewal grantees as well as new grantees.
Yeah, thank you for that question. We are asking that you send in and confirm the SWIFT vendor number, even if you haven't had a recent change or you're not a new grantee. We just want to update our records and confirm that our payment information is correct. So please do still send that in, even if we've worked with you in the past.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not seeing any additional questions coming in. Again, you can type them in the questions box or feel free to raise your hand. We can stay on the line for a few more minutes as questions come up.
Ellie? This is Ann Hakes. I raised my hand and then I unmuted myself, so I hope you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay, great. So I just want to make sure I don't submit a signed contract with this, do I? Or do I sign this, sign the contract, submit it with everything else, and then if you guys say it's okay, you sign it and send it back to me?
How does that work, Meredith, with the contracts? Are they draft form until you look them over?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you for raising it, Anne. You do not need to sign the contracts. I know in the past they have come back in hard copy form with those signatures, but now we'll be transitioning to using DocuSign for the signing. So we're asking that you review it, submit all the required items, and once everything has been approved, we will route the contract via DocuSign to the identified signers. And then the signers automatically will receive a copy of the executed contract. And if anyone else in your organization would like to receive a copy of that, you can submit that request to me and I'll make sure that gets sent on once it's been signed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That was a very, very quick webinar, and I want to honor that questions may come up later as you're moving through this process. So we're going to switch to the next slide just to make sure that you have our contact information. Should anything come up around general due diligence, Meredith would be your contact. Anything about program-specific due diligence, I would be your contact, and including the forward funding, I can certainly take that one as well. And then Gary Travis, who is on the line, is our partner at the Department of Human Services. So if you have any questions specific to services or including your service partner, Gary is certainly available to assist with that. And you could communicate directly to me and I can get Gary in the loop. But Gary, do you want to talk a little bit about maybe the cooperative agreement and including service partners or any other wisdom you want to impart on that?
Well, I will do what I can. I'm a little fresh out of wisdom, but here's what I have to offer. So the cooperative agreement really is that partnership between you as a housing agency and your local behavioral health service partners. And we are encouraging you to really engage with not just the identified behavioral health entity that you are signing off on, but identifying and engaging the range of behavioral health service providers and housing stabilization service providers that you have in your area. And there's a lot of different ways to approach that depending on the size of the region, the number of partners involved in that sort of thing. But at the very least, I encourage you to incorporate the contact and identifying information for these service providers into the cooperative agreement and identify a plan or process by which you are engaging with them, whether that's a meeting of some sort or some sort of notification process. Let us know how it is that you're engaging with this broader service resource to really assure that people in Bridges and Bridges RTC have the level of support and service that they are going to need in order to be successful in the units.
Great, thanks for that, Gary.
Yep.
So please feel free to reach out to us and good luck with the process. And we got one more coming in.
Yeah, we have a couple more questions that just came in, so
okay.
I'll go ahead and read those out. If agencies choose not to accept their award, will this funding be reallocated to other grantees?
Yes, that would be the process. If you do not complete after funding selections for some reason and do not get to an executed contract, then that funding would be reallocated. Not through this RFP necessarily, although we would look to other providers maybe to absorb that money depending on when we were notified. The sooner we were notified, the better that would be for us. And if it wasn't during the due diligence period and after or as we were executing contracts, then there would also be the likelihood that that money would be made available in a separate RFP. But if you're considering that, please notify us as soon as you can.
Thanks, Ellie. Here's the next one. It's my understanding new administrators are receiving a higher admin fee than existing administrators. Could you please explain why? We've been subsidizing our program with internal funds for a long time.
So I think there's a little bit of a misconception about new grantees coming in at higher levels. The program guide talks about more specifically how a new agency would come in and need to justify the amount that they're receiving. And so when we receive a new grantee, we have to review that justification and give them the administrative fee that aligns with that justification. So I think the perception is that they could justify, I suppose, a higher fee than other agencies, but we have not awarded a higher fee to any new grantee just based on that the way that that's set up and the way the justification needs to come in. So I think it's a misperception. It is open. I suppose that could happen, but we haven't justified that to date.
Thanks, Ellie. The next question is, do you need special documentation for an interim executive director? And I would say that if your board resolution specifies that the interim executive director is the person authorized to sign the contract, we wouldn't need anything additional. If the board resolution is a little bit more generic, stating that the executive director position rather than a specific person is authorized, you may also want to submit the board resolution that named the interim executive director. But if you have any follow-up questions related to that, please feel free to reach out and I can provide some more information.
Okay. I think, the questions about admin fee too, there's, quite a bit of information about our process with admin fees. I know that was a shift in this contract round where we moved to adjust for inflation, and then we also shifted the floor. So the bottom amount that agencies are receiving shifted up. But just to let you know about our process, I think you'll all recall a year and a half, almost 2 years ago, we did a survey of all the providers to start to gather more information about the admin fee. And we started that process really with the goal of analyzing the admin fee for all of our RA programs. So the Housing Trust Fund Rental Assistance programs will undergo the same process. And the goal for all RA programs, and we're shooting for this contract round, is to do a better job of meeting the needs of the providers across our programs. We understand that the first thing we needed to do was make a major adjustment for inflation. And then the second goal is for us to be more responsive to the providers, especially as we're starting to require more in reaching out with service providers and coordinating to create an effective program. So it is on the radar of Minnesota Housing. It's supported by leadership that we take a new approach with our admin fees, and it is a priority to get to the work for all of our RA programs in this contract round. We started with Bridges last contract round, and then we had the pandemic hit, so Housing Trust Fund survey wasn't able to be completed. So that'll be next in the process. And then all RA program administrators will get together and we'll start to resolve the issue of the admin fee. So for those of you that have been covering, I want to make sure that we understand that your costs are higher than the admin fee. And we've heard that from many providers, but we need to move in a process for all of our programs to make sure that we're creating one new system that gets at getting closer to covering the increased costs for providers. So that's just a generalized update. It's not part of necessarily the due diligence, but it definitely is part of contracting and finalizing your contract for Bridges. If you have any additional questions or want to talk out with me your process, I'd be happy to receive an email from you and have those discussions. Any other questions, Meredith, that popped up?
No others have come through yet.
Okay. Thanks everybody for attending. We'll go ahead and sign off. There's our contact information again. Feel free to reach out and enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you for attending.
Thank you.